Hello everybody. Today, as promised, we are taking a look at a video by What I Learned entitled Why We Don't Have Free Will and Why That's Okay. If you like the kind of work that I do here, do consider supporting the channel. Thank you. Maybe we'll do 1.25, see how that goes. And we're going to skip around a little bit. Not to make this...
So, did Truman have free will in this situation? What I mean by free will is, were his actions the result of conscious thoughts and intentions that he decided upon? And could he choose to do something different if we rewound the universe back to the moment before he walked away from the ferry?
Not to make this too long. So, What I Learned basically gives us the definition, the most relevant in my opinion, most interesting, most popular, generally accepted definition of free will. The capacity for agents to choose between different possible, very important, courses of action unimpeded, right? Were his actions the result of his own conscious choices? And could he have done otherwise if we were able to somehow rewind time, as he is rewinding the tape here, and see him potentially do something different, make a different choice?
The first part of this video will address this question, do we have free will? By looking at what parts of the mind we have control over. The second part will address why acknowledging a lack of free will could actually give you more control over your life.
So right off the bat, this seems like a self-refuting, contradicting statement, right? Having less control could give you more control. Okay, but this is when you give up reason, and again, I'm going to keep repeating this, invalidating free will, as I explained in another video, you basically invalidate the ability to reason because you couldn't have done otherwise. It's not like you're weighing various possibilities and choosing the one that suits you best for whatever reason. You're predetermined to just do what you will. And this clearly invalidates reason, and I think this is the strongest argument against people who say there is no free will. And I have yet to see it addressed. So we could just stop the video right here, right? But let's give him a chance.
Back to Truman. You might say I've set the bar too high because the memory of having lost his father in a boating accident was too traumatic of an experience for Truman to have free will. Let's say, for example, you introduce your friend Tom to your girlfriend, and he's excessively flirtatious with her, making you and your girlfriend uncomfortable. You might be pissed, but then you remember Tom just had a frontal lobotomy. You also know that the prefrontal cortex of the frontal lobe of the brain facilitates inhibiting inappropriate behavior. With this in mind...
So Tom has some kind of brain damage that inhibited his ability to inhibit his behavior, right? So whereas before he may have considered how his actions influence people, now he doesn't care. So how does that prove he doesn't have free will? He's doing what he wants to do. Yeah, his brain is impaired. It's different than the average brain. But how does this prove that he doesn't have free will? He's still doing what he wants to do. He no longer has... He's like a car that doesn't have any brakes. So he's not driving? Or it's a car that... Or he doesn't want to brake. It's not possible for him to hit the brakes. It's not an option for him to stop the car. Again, possible outcomes, to choose between possible outcomes. If this isn't a possible outcome, well then this is a bad example.
And you're probably more likely to forgive him, but you'll keep him away from your girlfriend. Actually, a man named Phineas Gage became very famous after receiving an unrequested frontal lobotomy.
So he talks about people with brain damage, right? This is an argument from the extremes, so we could just invalidate it insofar as that goes, right? Because most people, we're not talking about people who are brain damaged, right? So again, argument from the extremes, a fallacy. Just because crazy people out there may do something, that doesn't apply to all of us, obviously, right? And also, because their brains are damaged, their options are not the same. They can no longer do certain things, right? So certain outcomes that may be possible for people who have their whole brains intact and properly functioning, some of those aren't possible for these people. It's impossible for them to do certain things. Okay? So this isn't in accordance with the definition of free will.
I am supposed to... He even requested for an autopsy.
This doesn't invalidate free will in any way, shape, or form. And another thing, since we're trying to be logical here, when I say that you can't smile, if I make that statement, and you smile at me just once, right? You prove me wrong. You don't have to keep smiling all the damn time, right? So he basically has to show that none of our actions are the result of our will. And I can just show one action that is a result of our will, right? To debunk him. I didn't set this bar that high, he did. The things that we're considering here have to be possible, and he has to show that there is not a single instance of free will, because one single instance of free will is free will existing. However limited, it still exists. His hypothesis is that there is no free will, right? We can stop the video right now, right? Let's continue.
To be done on himself to find out if there is a biological reason for his drastic changes. The autopsy was done on August 2nd, and a pecan-sized brain tumor was found.
Once again, people with brain damage, they don't have all the options that we do, right? There's something wrong with them. And we're not talking about brain damaged people. We're concerned with most people on the planet. The way most of us are born, anyway.
There's even a case of child molestation. He went to the hospital complaining of a massive headache, and an egg-sized tumor was found in his brain. The tumor was...
And once again, you still have to show me that these people, these brain damaged people, are doing something they don't want to do, which you have failed to show. You have to show me that they couldn't have done otherwise, which you failed to show.
Was removed, and his inappropriate urges and behavior disappeared. Then about a year later, the tumor came back, and so did the inappropriate urges. The tumor was removed again, and the urges disappeared again. In situations like this, where the actual physical
Right, so his possibilities were... he had more possibilities when he didn't have the tumor, and the tumor limited his possibilities. Right? But that doesn't prove he doesn't have free will, because it's all about possible outcomes.
Integrity of the brain is compromised, it's safe to say that free will is greatly inhibited. If these examples represent level 5 inhibition, then level 4 could be something like being addicted to drugs.
Just because your will is inhibited in some way, shape, or form, free will, that doesn't mean you don't have it at all either, right? So he goes through these examples of altered brains, whether by brain damage or drugs or disease, right? And then from there he makes a jump to...
Hungry. Jonathan Lavav of Columbia...
Hunger.
Or going without sleep for a very long time. Level 2 might even include something seemingly minor, like just being hungry. Jonathan Lavav...
So we briefly heard him mention sleep deprivation, which is, like being on drugs. Now he's talking about hunger.
Of Columbia Business School in New York and colleagues analyzed over 1,000 parole hearings for 4 Israeli prisons, made over a 10-month period. They found that if the judge had eaten recently, prisoners had a 65% chance of being paroled. But the longer the judges went without food, the lower this percentage dropped, and it would often decline to prisoners having an almost 0% chance of getting paroled.
Okay, so whether or not you're hungry influences your decisions. Okay, what does that have to do with free will? Could a hungry judge have done otherwise? And what he's talking about here is patterns, right? That they tended to do something, these judges, which is not absolute, right? They did various things. Maybe there was a pattern or a tendency to do something, okay. But again, they still did something else, right? Now, had they done this, given, different possibilities, and besides, like, we really have to read the study and consider how it was conducted and all that other stuff. And again, anytime I do this, when it comes to studies that supposedly prove these grandiose claims for which you would need equally grandiose, significant evidence to prove them, whenever I do that, I'm always disappointed, right? So his contention is that hunger makes these guys do this, right? Yeah, but they don't all do that all the time. So if your intention is to show that, which still wouldn't prove that there is no free will anyway, right? But even in that instance, if you wanted to prove, even in that instance, faced with guilty or not guilty, right? Even though no two cases are the same anyway, but it seems like maybe the judge being hungry influences his decision. Well, but there are hungry judges that go the other way too. So did you prove that they couldn't have done otherwise? No, you proved that they could have and did do otherwise. If I am to accept that this sort of study would even be a good way of disproving free will, which it isn't, but even if I grant you that, you still failed to prove it because some of them did something else.
After some food during lunch break, however, the percentage shot back up to 65%. So then, what would the lowest level of free will inhibition look like? It might just be the base programming of our brains. Dan Ariely, professor of psychology and behavioral economics at Duke University and author of...
But he makes, I won't say dishonest, but he kind of biases the viewer going from brain damage, drug abuse, and all these impaired brains, if only temporarily, to, people being hungry. People with maybe normal brains that are just hungry for the moment, right? That's kind of a leap, and I think it biases the viewer to think something that maybe they shouldn't, right? He goes from the argument at the extremes and tries to make a leap of faith to everybody else, right? That's maybe hungry, or we'll see, right?
predictably...
So he basically he tries to make a jump from a certain set of impaired brains to everybody else. And that's just, if he's doing this consciously, right? Well, he can't help himself, obviously. But it seems a little, we'll just say it's fallacious.
Rational points out that people's decisions can be swayed in predictable ways simply by presenting the information differently. For example, people were asked, who's more attractive, Tom or Jerry? If there was a clone of Jerry that was slightly uglier, normal Jerry was the most attractive of the three. If there was an ugly clone of Tom, then Tom was the most attractive. People tend to pick the choice.
Once again, not everybody picks this choice, right? Some people don't. So that proves that they have free will, right? If I am to accept that this sort of experiment is valid in proving or disproving free will, you just proved free will because some people chose whatever. But all you're showing is that people can be manipulated. That's all you're showing.
Whose value is easiest to calculate. It's hard to say if Tom is better than Jerry, but Tom is surely better than his ugly clone. This is known as the decoy effect, and it's a great way to get people to buy stuff. Do you want a small popcorn for $3, a medium popcorn for $6.50, or a large for $7?
When I first watched this, and maybe it's because, I just wanted to be disagreeable in some way, shape, or form, or I think I consciously kind of tuned out what he was saying. I'm not sure. I picked medium. Maybe I just felt like medium is big enough and large is too big. I don't know. Right? I did. So if this is supposed to prove that we have no free will, well, listen to what he says.
I don't know if the small is a better value than the medium, but the large is clearly better than the medium, so I'll get that.
Right. How does this prove we have no free will? Even if everybody chose large, right? And I didn't, so bam, debunked. Right? But even if everybody chose large, well, that's just because they were motivated by value, right? They used the free will to apply the rational process. They calculated their options and they chose the one that made the most sense for them, right? Which is, because they were manipulated, I guess, in a way to also go for that, assuming that people like good value, right? They like to get the most bang for their buck. They employed their free will and rationality to pick what they thought was the best option for them, right? Just because, so people picking the best option for them invalidates free will? It proves free will. This video is nonsensical, guys. This is so It's shocking how people fall for this.
This shows up in other, quite important situations like here. Ariely is showing the drastic difference between countries' organ donation rates. Why are the countries on the left's rates so low compared to those on the right? It's not the culture, but the form at the DMV. The form for the countries with the low donation rates says, check the box below if you want to participate in the organ donor program. The form for countries with high donation rates says, check the box below if you don't want to participate.
I wasn't even listening to this. Is it because I have no free will? So, some of these, they're very similar arguments, and so I feel like I've done enough there. We're not going to listen to everything. Now he's going to talk about two different modes of thinking. Something that seems more instinctive versus more rational. Maybe.
Prize winner Daniel Kahneman says in his book Thinking Fast and Slow that we have two systems of thinking. System 1 operates automatically.
We have two systems of thinking, right? Not someone is making or something is making us think. We have two systems of thinking, right? But we have no free will.
And quickly, with little or no effort and no sense of voluntary control. System 2 allocates attention to the effortful mental activities that demand it, and is often associated with the subjective experience of agency, choice, and concentration. Some examples of System 1 are activities like orienting to the source of a sudden sound, making a disgust face when shown a horrible picture, and reading words on large billboards. Again, automatic things. System 2, on the other hand, includes activities like assessing whether a product is worth paying more for or not, focusing on the voice of a particular person in a noisy room, and looking for a woman with white hair. These are more deliberate. Here's an example. Mary's mom has 4 daughters, April, May, June, and... If you said July, this is because your System 1 got in the way. An active System 2 would notice I said Mary's mom, so the 4th daughter, of course, is Mary.
Okay, so which system of thinking did you employ here, right? Did you say July or did you say Mary? Right? You have two options, and you get to choose between one, and that proves you can only choose one, even though there are two answers here, and some people will say, maybe even most people will say July, right? And some people will say Mary. So this proves that free will exists. He's giving you all these examples that prove free will. If we are to accept that these are valid tests, which, you know, maybe they're as valid as can be. They're literally proving that free will exists, and he's saying the opposite. This guy is incoherent. You have two different modes of thinking. Who's choosing which one you're going to employ? Who? Show me this agent. Oh, that's right, you. Because you have these. This is so banal. Seriously. I mean, we're still getting to the good part, so stick around.
We are at some level aware of the competition between these two systems, hence our tendency to ask, is this a trick question, when things seem too easy?
Right? Free will.
Kahneman describes several ways the brain takes certain shortcuts wherever it can. For example, if I show you this...
The brain takes shortcuts. Whose brain? Is it my brain? They're acting like the brain is... Your brain somehow isn't you, right? Because they're so desperate to prove that you have no free will. Whose brain?
You'll probably think of soup instead of soap.
Once again, I don't know if I was just being obstinate or whatever, but I forget what the word was, but I thought of something else, right?
To this restaurant scene you were just looking at. This is called priming. Your brain was primed with the restaurant scene rather than a shower scene. But priming goes much farther than this. Kathleen Voss, in a paper titled...
Right, it's called cause and effect. You associate... Some things come to mind when you see certain things, right? So, and again, it's not like everybody's saying the same thing. You have the choice to not engage in this manipulation, right? Because you have free will, just as I did, perhaps subconsciously.
Psychological consequences of money showed that simply being exposed to images of money made people more individualistic and less willing to be involved with or depend on others. Over 418...
Yeah, we all have certain triggers. So, how does that invalidate free will?
Pages, Kahneman paints...
He already lost because the things... Right, this is already a dead argument because of what I said in the beginning, right? You invalidate reason, meaning you can't argue for anything. Why are you trying to convince us if we have no free will? We're going to do what we do anyway. Well, I guess you can't help yourself. That's why you're just doing this, right? So you've invalidated reason by saying there's no free will. And these things, these experiments, these examples you're showing us that are supposed to show that there are no instances in which a human being could have a free will, they're actually doing the opposite. So, like, argument's over. You're already lost. Because if I smile just once, that proves that I could smile, right? So we could just as well stop here, but this gets funnier, man.
Picture of how many of our decisions are a result of our mind's use of several time and energy saving.
Right? Our decisions are the result of our mind, right? Oh, okay. My mind? That's me, isn't it? Where's this agent that's making me do something? My brain isn't, like, this is so incoherent.
Shortcuts, heuristics, rules of thumb. And we are mostly unaware of these shortcuts working in the background, yet they...
Right, just because I'm unaware of something. Well, I mean, maybe there's something else going on there that could be, addressed. I don't know. Just because we're unaware of something doesn't necessarily mean that we have no free will. Or maybe we're not aware of it at the moment, and eventually we do become aware of it. And I'm not sure how you'd even prove that we're unaware of it, right? Because this is assuming that we understand the brain and the human body completely. But again, as with the headless chicken, there's more to us than just our brain insofar as our decision making and controlling our bodies, right?
Influence our conscious thinking.
Perhaps. Just saying, perhaps.
This still isn't enough to disprove free will.
Okay, so all this talk, and he admits this isn't enough to it's worse than that. You actually proved free will. If we are to accept your arguments as, plausible or sound, valid, then you actually disproved yourself.
Train conductor having the free will to choose which track to drive on, you could say these mental processes are just some boundaries that come with being human, and we have free will within the limit of these boundaries. But which processes...
That's what free will is. We are not boundless, limitless, all-powerful beings. We are not God. We are bound by certain things, right? But just because we cannot do everything or anything, that doesn't mean we can't do some things. And so long as I could show you that we have free will, that there's one decision that entails free will, that means we have free will, or that person does.
Of the mind, do we have the free will to control? Well, before conscious behavior occurs, there is a cascade of things happening in the brain. To present my next point, let's look at just a few things that affect our choice of behaviors. One is likes and wants. We'll just call this desires. For example, liking wine will generate behaviors like drinking wine. Two is emotions. Different emotions will color people's thinking pattern.
Okay, so will is desire, basically. A want. Emotion has nothing to do with will.
And behaviors in different ways. Three, physiology will also affect
Physiology
behavior.
has nothing to do with will.
Things like heart rate, blood pressure, how much adrenaline is in your system, how much you slept, if you're sick, etc. The last thing is beliefs, as in the ideas and...
Beliefs have nothing to do with will, right? He got the first one right, but the rest of these aren't, that's not the will. Those are different concepts.
Principles you feel strongly about or feel are part of your identity. These will affect how you act and how you think. So, which of these four do we have control over moment to moment? First, your desires. You can't really control these, yet they affect your behavior and your thoughts.
You can't really control these, right? So you kind of can. No, you have to be able to show that we can't control these at all.
Right now, I have no control over my dislike of sea urchin and my liking of macadamia nuts.
Well, the reason why you don't like or you prefer macadamia, right, is probably the reason why you don't like urchin. You're making a choice. If you don't have that choice, right, and you're hungry, you're gonna love some sea urchin. You're gonna teach yourself to love it, right? It's called an acquired taste.
I could not conveniently decide to like sea urchin when I'm at a sushi restaurant, or suddenly choose to dislike macadamia nuts when...
Yeah, maybe you can't do it on the fly, but, you know, maybe it's just one of those things that isn't possible, right? If it's not possible, then it has nothing to do with free will. Our choices have to be possible, but I think it's possible. Everyone has acquired a taste for something. That doesn't mean you're going to love it right off the bat, but you did eat it, right? If you have no other option and you're hungry, you're going to eat the thing that you don't like. And over time, you will acquire a taste for it if you make yourself do that, right? So we have these strong forces that seem to be outside of us that are telling us, oh, you don't like this, right? And yet we can overcome them. Doesn't that prove free will? There's some force out there that is, if we are to accept what he says, that it's not us doing it, right? Some strong force out there telling you, ew, sea urchin is icky. Okay? And yet, if need be, we can overcome that, right? Of our own volition, despite whatever force may be there. I think it's us still, right? That proves we have free will. Duh.
When I'm saving money. If we had free control over our desires, life would be far easier. On a diet, just stop the desire to eat unhealthy foods. Want to get a lot of studying done? Just make yourself like chemistry more than you do video games.
Yeah, but that desire to eat those junk foods is trumped by your desire to be healthy, right? So you have two choices. Be healthy or not be healthy. Even though there's this desire that doesn't seem, as he says, it's not yours. Some force out there is forcing you, right, to love this food. You actually have enough free will and strength to go against that, right? He's proving free will. And this applies to all of these examples.
And so on. You might be able to distract yourself from desires, but you cannot choose to have desires appear or disappear. Let me again clarify that I'm talking about controlling desires in the moment, because you may change your likes and dislikes eventually. I used to...
Okay, that proves free will. You have to be able to show we could never do anything like that, and yet you just admitted that there's free will. I think there's a lot more free will than this guy seems to admit to, even though he, at the same time, is saying that there is no free will, right? He's incoherent. As I proved, we have a lot more free will than that, right? But still, either way, wherever that threshold is, you just invalidated yourself.
Really like gummy bears. But after keeping my sugar intake very close to zero for quite a while, gummy bears now taste far too sweet and don't appeal to me at all nowadays. Maybe if I ate a bunch of them, I'd start to like them again, but I cannot have myself like gummy bears in this moment. This is still the case for more strongly held desires. Say it is my ambition to become a painter. I cannot now decide to suddenly like math just as much as I like art. Or I guess I wouldn't want to do that. Next is emotions, which of course affect...
Yeah, but it's like, are those possible things, right? Can you will yourself to fly? Oh, no? Well, then I guess you don't have free will. It's not possible, right? These have to be possible options. You have to show that these are possible. And by showing that they are possible, right? Well, how do you show that they're possible? Is because someone did do that. And once you show that they're possible, well, guess what, buddy? Free will. Because someone did do it. So we can't, can you will yourself to fly? No, you can will to fly, but it's not going to manifest itself in the physical world insofar as you flapping your arms, growing wings and flying, right? It's impossible. This is like, ask yourself with his non-human human being or alien invasion to try to prove something about, eating animals. What? Right? Your hypothesis has to be grounded in reality. And if not, it's bunk. But check this out. Even though we can't literally make ourselves grow wings and fly, because we have the desire to fly, right? We build planes, we get on them, we go paragliding. We found all these other ways, right, to be able to fly by means of, tools and implements and machines. Despite the fact that we can't literally make ourselves grow wings and fly because we have desires, free will, right? We've invented ways to fly. He's literally time and time again proving that we have free will.
your conscious thoughts. Most people are more or less good at preventing emotions from affecting their behavior, but for the most part, you do not control whether emotions arise or not.
Okay, so some people control their emotions, some people don't. Okay, you just prove free will.
When it gets loud enough, one of three things will happen. 1, I'll notice it without any irritation. 2, I'll notice it, be a little irritated.
Again, he's just talking about certain triggers that make him react a certain way. But he'd have to prove that he cannot act in any other way. So he's talking about the same trigger, how it elicits all these various reactions, right? He's proving free will. If we are to assume these tests are valid tests.
And then choose to ignore it. Or 3, I'll be pretty pissed and maybe even say something out loud like, man, I'm tired of this shit. My response will depend on a couple of things, including if I've been sleeping well and if I've been exercising or meditating. If all these things are going well, then the construction noise barely bothers me. However, if I didn't sleep well, or if I'm hungry, or I didn't exercise, then I'm prone to some level of irritation.
Prone, right? Prone. He's talking about certain patterns. If he's in a certain state of mind, right, then he tends to react a certain way. So yeah, there are certain things that impact us, influence us, trigger us, and yet we don't always react the same way, right? Time and time again, this guy is proven free will.
Feel that I can choose my response to this irritation, but whether the emotion arises or not is already decided before the construction noise starts.
Emotions are not desires. That's not will, right?
You may be able to. You do not make a decision to be sad before you become sad. Then there's physiology.
You can make yourself sad. Why not? Think of something sad. Watch a sad movie. You can make yourself sad. Physiology. Oh, you can't control your physiology, he says.
Your heart rate, blood pressure, your immune response, which hormones are being released, etc.
Once again, if these things are impossible, no one can, right? That these aren't It's the same nonsense over and over again, right? You could stop breathing, can't you? Of course you can. But then you breathe again. Why? Well, because you want to. But you can stop breathing. You can't make your heart stop, really? You can't think of any way to make your heart stop. That's weird, because a lot of people have. You can't, I mean, there are instances where you can't control your physiology. Right? And Wim Hof has delved really, really deeply into that, if you are to believe the things he says are true. There are some mystics who've been able to show that you could control your physiology, at least to a certain degree. And if there's certain things you can't control, that's because they're impossible. Thus, they are not on the table for you to choose from. Right? You can't control your physiology. Well, you can't fly. I guess there's no free will.
Are not controlled by your conscious.
Well, you kind of can, right?
Thoughts. With enough training, you can gain some control over certain aspects of your physiology.
Right? You can gain some control over certain aspects. He just debunked himself, right? He would have to show that you could never do any of these things.
But your physiology, for the most part, doesn't. But if it decided to do otherwise, you would be the victim of these changes, rather than.
Oh, okay, he's citing Sam Harris. This is the good part, man. Sam Harris is an imbecile, guys.
Cause. Some argue that physiology is actually the business. Anil Seth gives the example of how seeing a bear does not in itself generate the experience of fear. Rather, the theory has received some criticism, but there's a lot of examples that...
Really? Some criticism? But there are a lot of like, none of this is absolute. Saying no free will is absolute, right? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If your hypothesis is absolute, your proof has to meet that burden of proof, right? Again, if you say I can't smile, and I just smiled at you just once for a split second, well, you're wrong.
Corroborate his hypothesis, and is having muscle spasms may also get a...
This is just
certain
the same nonsense over and over, right? Different experiments.
To be consistently mapped to certain areas. Is that free will? Hunger or thirst will cue your desire to eat.
Ah, this is hilarious.
Or drink. I pick up the tea because I'm thirsty. Is that free will?
Oh, it gets me every time. I have the desire to to drink, so I pick up a beverage and drink it. Is that free will? These people are imbeciles. I don't know if they're trying to be edgy or something. Like, they're throwing you right in your face, proving free will time and time and time again, saying and trying to convince you that that proves you have no free will. But again, if you give up free will, you'll lose the ability to reason. Right? How many of you have dehydrated themselves, right? Your body was telling you you got this trigger to drink something, right? You were thirsty, and yet, I don't know, chose to do something else. You were distracted, like you didn't drink, right? So just because you're thirsty, right, that doesn't mean that you're gonna drink, obviously, right? You have two possible options: drink or not drink, or a third one, do something else, right? So this guy says that I have the desire to drink, and then I drink. Is that free will? You're goddamn right it is.
You know? In another video, I talked about how people deprived of salt develop strong cravings for it, and vitamin-deficient babies developed an uncanny liking for cod liver oil. Next is beliefs.
So there are these mechanisms that, like, yeah, human bodies are wonderful. When we are deficient in something, we crave something, right? My wife has really high iron levels right now. She doesn't like red meat. Liver is just like, she says it tastes like an iron gate, right? Okay. What does that have to do with no free will? What?
By the way, I'm lumping principles, values, and ideas in with beliefs. With enough exposure to certain types of information, you can surely change your beliefs eventually. For example, a conservative person may slowly shift to being more liberal if, say, they move countries and are exposed.
Okay, so you can change your beliefs. You can impact what you believe in. Okay, so thanks for proving free will yet again.
To a totally new culture for a long enough time. Or someone could spend enough time reading the work of a compelling conspiracy writer, and they might start to believe.
But if it's not possible to make yourself believe something in the moment, it's not on the table as one of the possible options, right? Of course not.
Believe in certain but you will not truly believe that. Maybe you could sign up for a cheese moon brainwashing service, but even then, whether the brainwashing works or not is not in your control. Either the brainwashing technique is...
It's not in your control? Really? How many people have deluded themselves, made themselves believe certain things? It happens all the time. Just because some people are not willing to delude themselves, well, that's because they have free will and integrity. And once again, if we're unable to do something, no one is, then it's not an option that's on the table. And it has nothing to do with free will. It's just impossible because we're finite human beings. We're not all powerful. Surprise, surprise. It's like these people expect to be God. They expect to be omnipotent. They expect to be omniscient and everything. Be able to do whatever they please. And if not, then they're going to throw their toys out the sandbox and say, see, we have no free will. I mean, this is literally retarded, guys. I don't know how much more of this I can take, but we gotta get to the Sam Harris part, man.
So effective that you come to believe that the moon is made out of cheese, or it's not. An atheist may decide that he wants to become religious, and tries his best to believe in the tenets of some religion. But whether the books he reads or the people he talks to are convincing enough to result in him genuinely adopting...
Again, this is the same thing over and over again.
...his beliefs. So, in the moment, we have at most minimal control over our desires, emotions...
I disagree. I think we have a lot more than that. But that in and of itself, you just debunked yourself. Because you have to show that we don't have any. So any control. You just debunked yourself.
Physiology, and beliefs, yet each of these affect our behavior and our conscious thoughts. So, is it the case that each of these can influence your conscious thought, but we still have control? Do you control your thoughts? Think about this question for a second. You may have been unfazed by my videos so far, and you reacted to the question with something like, of course we control our thoughts. Or maybe you thought, no, our thoughts are controlled not by us, but by unconscious factors. Or maybe you haven't had enough time to decide what to think. Now you might be thinking, did he just say haven't? In any of these cases, Did you freely choose which reaction you had?
Yes.
Here is Sam Harris giving a lecture on free will in 2012.
From the perspective of your conscious mind, you are actually no more responsible for your next thought than you are for your birth into this world. You can see that you...
Oh, wow, you're not responsible. You can't choose to be born. Huh. You slave.
You no more author the next thing you think than the next thing I say. Thoughts simply appear in consciousness.
Your thoughts are not your own. They just appear out of nowhere, right? Where's the evidence for this? Because I say so. They just appear in your consciousness. Where do they appear from? Who's making them happen? Not me. Sam Harris is a buffoon. It's shocking how many people have fallen under this magician's spells.
What are you going to think next? What am I going to say next? I could suddenly start...
that which I want to.
Talking about why we don't eat owls. Why don't we eat owls? They seem perfectly good. Where did that come from? It came out of nowhere as far as you're concerned, but the same thing is happening...
What do you mean nowhere?
In your own mind at this moment. I mean, I'm standing up here trying to reason with you, and you will think, he does look a little like Ben.
Right? He just proved free will. Here I am trying to engage you in this conversation, and you're not engaging me. 'Cause you have free will.
Stiller. Thoughts just emerge in consciousness. We are not authoring them. That would require...
Where's the proof? Like, he has no proof. And then listen to this impossible standard, ridiculous, absurd, laughable standard of proof he has.
We think them before we think them.
When I was watching this part,
thoughts just emerge in consciousness. We are not authoring them. That would require that we think them before we think them.
When I
To prove that we author thoughts would require that we think them before we think them. So to prove that I'm drinking this coffee right now, I have to drink it before I drink it, right? Does this make any sense to anybody? So, in order to prove that you're thinking thoughts, you have to think them. That's what he just said. Can any of you think of the same thing twice? You think it's possible? Okay, Sam Harris debunked. If you could just think the same thing twice, right? That's what he's literally saying. But then he's going to say, yeah, but the thought that you thought before you thought the thought, well, did you think before that first thought the same thing? This is gobbledygook, right? So basically, to prove to Sam Harris that you author your own thoughts, you have to think a thought before you think a thought, right? Well, but that first thought you thought that proves the second thought. Well, what proves that thought was your thought? You'd have to have some kind of third thought that you thought before you thought the thought that you, before you thought the thought you thought, right? So basically, this is the impossible standard that Sam Harris sets. You have to be able to go into the past ad infinitum. Ad infinitum, however you say that, right? You have to be able to go infinitely into the past and think the same one thought over and over and over. Like, Sam Harris is literally saying that unless your mind is infinite, right? You cannot prove that you have free will. Unless you have the mind of God, which he doesn't believe exists. This is the impossible standard, he says. You can't prove that your thoughts that you're thinking, unless you think your thoughts forever into the past, infinite past, you cannot prove that your thoughts are your own thoughts. The guy is literally a retard. All I have to do is just think a thought. That's it. What do I think of next? Whatever I want. That's it. But Will over here had like a eureka moment. Oh, wow, Sam Harris. So amazing. The guy is a nincompoop.
I was watching this part.
Nincompoop. I can't
Thoughts
fucking talk
just
today.
emerge in consciousness. We are not authoring them. That would require that we think them before we think them.
When I was watching this part, I nodded my head in agreement. I didn't consciously decide.
Whoa, dude. That's so deep. I can't take this anymore.
To agree
Wrap it
and
up,
then
bro.
nod. It just happened. Why did I select this reaction and not scoff in disagreement?
Why did I select this reaction? Because you have free will, brother.
Well, because what he said made sense to me. So why did I decide to have it make sense to me? Well, it's in line with the other information in my brain that came from books I've read and conversations or experiences I've had. Why did I choose to insert such information in my head? Questions like this could go on into why my parents chose to be born from their parents.
That does not follow. It's a non sequitur. This is just gobbledygook, right? He expects you, once again, to be able to will impossibility into existence, or you have no free will. When, before he gets to that impossible scenario, in order to even get to that impossible scenario, just like Sam Harris with his infinite chain of the same thought into the past and probably the future too, right? Every single little link in that chain is, I did this, I did that, I, until finally you get to some impossibility that's just out of your control because you weren't even born. Right? But for Sam Harris, the burden of proof that you have free will is that you have to be an infinite mind and you have to have lived forever, right? This is literally, ask yourselves, non-human human being and fucking alien invasions proving that eating an egg is wrong. People are retarded, man. Wrap this shit up. Come on.
Even if you could trace what life experiences led to the way you talk or the desires and beliefs that influence your thinking patterns, we happen to agree with. We of course have a will to do things. My will to make this video is what caused it to exist.
Okay, so he's literally saying we have free will.
But I did not freely choose this will.
So our choices matter. And
But I did not freely choose this will. Yes, you're a finite human being. You're not God, bro. Sorry to break it to you.
there are clearly paths toward making wiser ones. I mean, there's no telling how much of a conversation.
Not freely choose this will.
So our choices matter, and there are clearly paths toward making wiser ones.
Our choices, we make choices, right? This is what he's saying.
There's no telling how much of a conversation with a smart person could change you, but we can't choose what we choose in life.
We can't choose what we choose, right? I can't eat what I eat. I mean, this is literally incoherent. He's saying that you choose things, but you don't choose them at the same time. This is like the rejection of the second law of logic, law of non-contradiction, right? We can't choose what we choose. I can't drink coffee when I drink coffee. Wow, that's deep, bro. Wow. I want to cry. I literally want to cry. This is the video I was sent that invalidates free will. Look at the big brains on Sam Harris and Will. Like, and then, you know, let's see what else he has to say.
And when it seems that we choose what we choose, so perhaps when going back and forth between two options, we don't choose to choose what we choose.
We don't choose what we choose, right? I don't eat what I eat. When I shit, I don't shit. Do you shit when you shit? Of course you don't shit when you shit. The guy is literally a retard.
This kind of discussion might provoke someone to perform arbitrary actions to demonstrate their free will. Look.
Okay, I really can't. Sorry, I'm getting a little vulgar and nasty here. Next thing he's gonna do is, and I never even listen to the last part of the video because I've had enough. There's nothing I could learn from this guy, not in this instance anyway. But his conclusion will be as stated in the beginning. Funny how that works, huh? That even though we don't have control, that gives us more control, right? Because we don't choose what we choose. If you accept that you don't choose what you choose, right? Then obviously the logical conclusion from that, even though it doesn't make any sense, but if we follow that sort of bunk logic, then less control obviously means more control because you don't choose what you choose. I mean, what else can you say? Like, this just proves what I've been saying. Send me more videos about people debunking free will, and it's going to be the same kind of gobbledygook every single time. Because in closing, yet again, just to drive the point home, people who reject free will invalidate reason, and when you invalidate reason, this is the sort of dumb shit that comes out of your mouth, right? You reject reason literally by violating laws of logic. Even though you do something, or you doing something proves that you didn't do it. I got nothing more to say, man. I literally pity the people who fall for this nonsense. I don't understand how that happens, but I think the answer to that is all in this video, the very beginning of the video. Something, somewhere, somehow impaired your fucking brain. And once again, if you reject free will, you reject logic, and you start talking out both sides of your mouth at the same time. Just, how many times do we have to prove this? And that's the strongest argument against this no free will assertion, right? How can you have reason without free will, right? And this is kind of I'm not saying this is conscious, but for some very, very smart person who came up with this at some point, or agreed with this at some point and decided to use it to brainwash you, this was very, very intentional, I think, for somebody somewhere. I'm not saying Sam Harris, because I think he's probably just a useful idiot, because he's for damn sure an idiot. But at some point, someone realized that if they can convince you that you have no free will, they will invalidate reason. They'll make you reject reason, and they can make you say and do all kinds of dumb shit. And this is exactly what's happening, right? What else is there to say, honestly? Thank you for watching.